Welcome to MTG Friends. I'm Ryan. We're doing essential blue cards for Commander EDH. We're talking about auto-include cards, serious consideration, and the third kind of card is going to be those cards that are situational depending on the kind of build you're putting together, whether or not you should include them or not. And we'll cover those as well. Below is going to be a link that you can click on after this episode to check out the other colors of the color wheel. We are covering them all, folks. All right, so let's jump into blue. And in the first category is going to be draw. And at the top of this list is going to be, of course, Rhystic Study. It's a 3-drop enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. So you get this thing out, and every time your opponent plays a spell, which is going to be frequently, you got to go, hey, you going to pay that extra 1? Hey, you going to pay that extra 1? You're going to love doing it. They're going to grumble and be grumpy about it, and they're probably going to try to get rid of Rhystic Study as quickly as possible off the board. But until they do, you get to keep drawing cards, or at the very least, make them have to think about their mana management. So this thing is equally powerful on both sides, because if they don't pay it, you draw a card. If they do pay it, that means they didn't spend that on something they otherwise would have. Win-win for you. It's a great card, auto-include for sure, in a mono blue and dual colored blue deck. Absolutely, without a doubt. If you cannot run this because of financial reasons, run Mystic Remora or Kumena's Awakening. I almost completely blew the name of that card, but we're gonna move on because I kind of got it. I cracked myself up. All right, Mystic Remora is a 1-drop cumulative upkeep of 1. Just means it keeps getting bigger and bigger, the pay that you have to do. And whenever an opponent plays a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. So this isn't going to stick with you the entire game, but it's going to seriously help you early on in mid-game, absolutely, because paying 4 to do a spell, that's a serious consideration for your opponent to have to deal with. And Kumena's Awakening is similar, where it's a 4-drop enchantment with Ascend, which just means that you need to have 10 or more permanents to get the City's Blessing. If you do, then you get some cool stuff out of this card. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. So the downside of that part, if you don't have the City's Blessing, is you're all drawing cards. But quickly enough, it's if you have the City's Blessing, instead only you draw a card. So, fantastic. All right, next up is a serious hate piece for your blue mono decks or multicolors, depending, is Narset Parter of Veils. Whoo-wee, it's a 3-drop legendary planeswalker Narset with each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. And notice that's your opponents, not also you. So that's groovy, fantastic, super awesomeness Maximus. And then it's got a -2 loyalty, which is look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it's got 5 loyalty, so you can do that a couple times. Wow. So this not only goes and fetches you something you may need, but it shuts down extra draw for your opponents. Auto-include this for sure in your blue deck. Consecrated Sphinx. It's a 4 blue flyer, 4/6 body. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Notice it says you may, so you get to choose whether you do that. So that is extra spicy, extra powerful. It does cost you 6 to get on the play field, but we are in Commander, folks, so you might be able to tease this out turn 4, turn 5, just depending on what's going on with your mana rocks, etc., etc. All right, I would say this is an auto-include, except that it costs 6, so let's just leave it at serious consideration for your build and move on from that. Kindred Discovery. Definitely not an auto-include, but a serious consideration for the certain kind of builds. It is a 3 colorless blue enchantment. As Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So there you go. It is tribal specific. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. So I don't know, the first thing that comes to my mind is wizards or merfolk. Or I'm sure you're thinking of something right now going, ooh, yeah, Kindred Discovery. Or you're going, oh yeah, I run that. That card rocks. And you know why. And now if you don't know this card, you do, and you do know why it's cool. I digress. Yeah, that needs some serious digression. So moving on. Treasure Cruise. At the face of this looks super jank and way too expensive for what it does. Oh, but wait, there's a catch, and it's in your benefit. So for 7 colorless blue, it's a sorcery with Delve that is draw 3 cards. And drawing is super important in Commander, as you know. But this thing is an Ancestral Recall for 1 blue in the right kind of circumstances. So you draw 3 cards. Oh, booyah. Now, the Delve mechanic is what makes this an Ancestral Recall. It's each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1. So if you're playing, say, blue-black, where you're shoving things into your graveyard and you have graveyard play, Treasure Cruise is definitely an auto-include for you. It's a consideration depending on what kind of build that you're putting together. And, of course, put something in the comments if you have a question about, hey, this is the kind of deck I'm putting together. This is the deck I have so far. Should Treasure Cruise go in that? We'd be happy to answer those questions and give you our opinion on what's going on. All right, next up is Windfall, which you may not be super familiar with. It is a 3-drop sorcery. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So let's say you only got 1 card left and it's Windfall, and you have an opponent that has 7 or more, depending. Now you just refilled your hand. Fantastic. Run this card in blue. It will not let you down. Great card. Time Twister for 3. Sorcery. Set Time Twister aside in a new graveyard pile. Shuffle your hand, library, and graveyard together into a new library and draw a new hand of 7 cards, leaving all the cards in play where they are. Opponent must do the same. I can always tell when a card is super old, and this is one of them. It's just great to get stuff back into your hand. Fantastic card. Serious consideration for your blue deck build. And then this one, some would say that this is an auto-include. I'm not going to go that far. It's definitely a consideration because it's a great tutor, but you got to have a reason to run this in your deck. And it's Mystical Tutor for 1. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card and reveal that card. Shuffle your library, then put the card on top of it. So it puts it on top of your card. So you got to be fetching something that's a combo piece or something that you definitely want that's either a sorcery or an instant. I would not say that this is the most powerful tutor that we have, but in blue, it's definitely great and a consideration for you to put in your build if there's a specific kind of sorcery instant, or you want situational flexibility for the battlefield, then you're definitely going to want to put in Mystical Tutor. It is a great card. All right, we are now into the next category, which is Counterspell. And of course, we're going to start off this list with Counterspell. Of course, why wouldn't we? It's a 2-drop counter target spell. It doesn't get any simpler than that. I mean, yes, this is how it all got started with this shenanigans of countering other people's stuff. Oh man, awesome. Pact of Negation. It costs you nothing and it's an instant. It's counter target spell. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 5. If you don't, you lose the game. So you got to be real careful how do you utilize this card because, there's a downside to it, but you're probably most likely going to be using it on your opponent's turn when you're tapped out and you absolutely need to shut down whatever is going on and whatever they're trying to hit with onto the battlefield. So Pact of Negation. I'm not going to say auto-include, but seriously consider this card in your deck, especially if you need to keep a lot of control going, which, hey, that's what blue is all about. All right, next up is Force of Will, in the same kind of realm, which is for 5, it's an instant. You may pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay Force of Will's mana cost. Counter target spell. So that's all targeted spells. And this is incredible because having that flexibility, again, to pay nothing is just incredible. You can surprise people with this card. Although most people that play Commander a lot aren't going to be super surprised of you running Force of Will because it is definitely an auto-include in most blue builds. They're just going to have like a grimace going, oh, you had it. You had Force of Will. Meh. Now, another one that is just incredibly janky is Mana Drain for a measly blue instant counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless equal to that spell's converted mana cost. This is insane, folks. I mean, not only do you just counter it for only 2 and it's any target spell, you also then get to get mana in your mana pool that's equal to whatever you just countered. Haha, yeah, haha. That's where you go, tee-hee, ah, yeah, I did that. Maybe you shouldn't do that on the playfield. You're not going to make friends if you do that. But pretty sure you're not trying to make friends because they're already your friends if you're running blue, especially mono blue. But hey, moving on. Force of Negation. It is a 3-drop instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So much like the other previous cards, this is just super cool that you can tease this thing out for paying nothing depending on if you got the extra requirements that it needs. Great card, Force of Negation. And continuing in this theme is Fierce Guardianship. If blue didn't have enough jank going on with control, they printed this card. And it is a 3-drop instant. If you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. I'm definitely going to say this is an auto-include. I mean, absolutely. Without a doubt, auto-include this thing in your commander build. Narset's Reversal. It's a 2-blue instant. Copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new target for the copy. This is fantastic. Now, notice it says to its owner's hand. So you could jankify and do some shenanigans with your opponent, but you could also do this to your own spell, because if you read it real carefully, copy target instant or sorcery spell, doesn't say opponents, and then return it to its owner's hand, which would be you. You may choose new targets for the copy. So I love the versatility in this card and the fact that it only costs you 2, because you don't have to target your opponent's spell. You can target your own. So because of that, I would recommend this be an auto-include in mono blue decks, absolutely, and a consideration in dual and more. Okay, we have entered removal. And at the absolute tippy top of this list is a absolutely broken card, Cyclonic Rift. It's for 2, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand with overload of 7, which is return all non-land permanents you don't control to its owner's hand. Whew, let's take a quick little pause there and just soak it in. This is definitely an auto-include for all blue builds because it's just so janky and turns the table so significantly and seriously in any commander play, especially with 3 opponents. So run this card. I guarantee you that if you're playing somebody else that's running blue, they're most likely playing Cyclonic Rift in their deck as well. So just an incredibly great, awesome card. Okie dokie smoky. Swan Song for, you guessed it, 1 measly blue instant counter target enchantment, instant or sorcery spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. We do not care about that 2/2 token, do we, folks? No, we care about the fact that this costs us 1 and does that. That is absolutely great. Just very cool. Reality Shift. This is an instant for 2 blue, exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. That player puts the top card of their library onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. If it's a creature card, it can be turned face up anytime for its mana cost. So it's got a little bit of a downside, but not really if you really pay attention to what this card does. It only costs you 2, and you get to exile a creature. And mind you, they get to take the top card they have of their library and put it on the battlefield as a 2/2 creature. Now, it might not be a creature underneath, so hey, awesome. But if it is a creature card, it can be turned up, but they still have to pay the mana to play it. So they were going to be top decking that card anyways, and that is the one downside. So hey, I'm liking this card. Serious consideration for your blue deck build. Rapid Hybridization. I said it right. It's for 1 blue instant, destroy target creature. Yes, sir. It can't be regenerated. That creature's controller puts a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token onto the battlefield. Now, blue is not super strong for those kinds of removal, destruction spells. So this is a definite auto include if you're in mono blue. But if you're running, say blue black, for instance, you might not necessarily need to run this because black has so much removal. So this is a situational card that, depending on your build, you're going to want to auto-include it for mono blue, and possibly depending on what other colors you add to your commander deck. Pongify for 1 blue, destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Its controller creates a 3/3 green ape creature token. Again, if mono blue, you're going to want to include this. If not, then it just depends on what other color you're running. Chain of Vapor in 1 blue. It is an instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then that permanent's controller may sacrifice a land. If the player does, he or she may copy the spell and may choose a new target for that copy. So this is an interesting card because it's got politics behind it. Because if you're playing against 3 other opponents, you may need to team up with one of them to start dealing with a bigger threat. So Chain of Vapor's downside situationally isn't going to have a downside because there can be some negotiating going on. And as you all know, in Commander, you're negotiating all the time. You're playing politics. So this is a great political piece that you can have in your deck. And certainly run this in it if you're in mono blue, and consider it in others. Curse of the Swine. For X blue blue, sorcery, exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. Another just great removal for blue. So it really is self-explanatory. It gives them a measly 2/2 green boar and token, and you get to get rid of something that's really nasty that's on the battlefield. Now we are on the everything else category, which is just a way of saying other blue cards we should really talk about before we end the episode. And again, please hit subscribe, please hit like, please hit the alerts if you want to be checking out the other stuff. Moving on. Baral, Chief of Compliance. It's a 2-drop 1/3 legendary creature human wizard. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Bananas great. And whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So this is gonna let you sift through your deck. It's gonna, I mean, this thing has so much going on. It makes your stuff cost less. And whenever you counter a spell, which you're gonna be running counters, you then get to draw a card. That's great. That is just absolutely great, and it costs you only 2. All right, this next one is definitely a situational card. It's Deadeye Navigator. It's a 4 blue creature spirit, 5/5. Now, this card within itself is just sort of a dead card. It's a lame 5/5 that costs you way too much. But it has Soul Bond. You may pair this creature with another unpaired creature. When either enters the battlefield, they remain paired for as long as you control both of them. And as long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature, each of those creatures has pay 2, exile this creature, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So you get to flick that creature with Deadeye Navigator attached to it, and it stays attached to it back onto the battlefield. So you'd want to use this as sort of a combo piece, or if you have a creature that you want to keep bringing in and out of play. Otherwise, don't run this card. So there's going to be times that this is going to make absolute sense for the build you're running. But it does cost 6, so you got to be careful in what kind of builds you put this into. Next up is Phyrexian Metamorph. It is 3 blue Phyrexian mana, which just means that you can pay 2 life instead of that Phyrexian pip. You may have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So you can tease this thing out for 3 and then copy an artifact or creature on the battlefield, and notice it's on the battlefield though, so it doesn't have to be your creature. So this can be an incredibly versatile, powerful card for your build. I would say seriously consider this in any blue deck you run, but it's in the everything else category because it's very niche, very specific depending on what you're trying to do. All right, another one that just want to make sure you're aware of it, it's Bribery. I do not actually run this a ton in blue decks, but it is pretty janky and pretty fun. It is 3 colorless blue sorcery, so it costs I think about 1 too many, but here we go. Search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card into play under your control. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So you get a tutor in your opponent's deck and go grab, the most powerful card out of there. Can you imagine if you go grab like, I don't know, an Eldrazi or something and then drop it onto their battlefield and go, see what I did? I've got Annihilator. Yeah, and use that voice too, because, that would be super fun and you'll just make so many friends that way. So many friends. Propaganda. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. So, self-explanatory, just start shutting things down. Consider this card if you want to just shut down some opponent's jank where they're going super wide. Or if your playgroup tends to do those kinds of things, then propaganda it up. Spark Double, 3 blue, creature illusion 0/0. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it if it's a creature. It enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. This is just an absolutely incredible support card that just you're going to want to put in depending on what you're doing, what you're putting together, especially if you're running like a Super Friends deck or you're running something that's heavy into creatures, heavy into planeswalkers, etc., etc. Maybe not hardcore countering control blue. Then you'd want to run Spark Double. Shizzle for Scherzies. Then we got High Tide. It is a 1 blue instant until end of turn. Whenever a player taps an island for mana, that player adds blue to his or her mana pool, in addition to the mana the land produces. So you want to get that extra ramp going, drop down High Tide onto the battlefield. All right, we are into the honorable mentions section, and this is honorable mentions because you're not necessarily going to be running all of these cards, if any of these cards. It's just completely situational and depends on what kind of build you're doing. Let's start with one that is super jank but costs a ton of mana, and that is Omniscience. It is 7 blue, blue, blue enchantment. You may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. Ooh wee. So if you can tease this out without paying, 7 blue, 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 then by all means put this thing into your deck. Or if you're ramping up like a madman / woman, then consider this card. It's pretty self-explanatory what it does. Makes all your spells cost nothing. That's pretty crazy. All right, Nexus of Fate is another one. People just hated this card in Standard. A lot of people still hate this card. It is 5 blue, blue. Take an extra turn after this one. If Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. I am not necessarily recommending running this card. Just wanted you to be aware of it in case you weren't super familiar with it. Anytime you can take an extra turn and you can tease out stuff like this, yeah, absolutely. But in Commander, this isn't as powerful as it was in the other formats. The other formats, this was bananas. Absolute bananas. All right. Temporal Manipulation. For 5, take an extra turn after this one. So it's a cheaper Nexus of Fate for 5 that just doesn't get shuffled back into your library. If you feel like you like to take extra turns, then Temporal Manipulation will be part of your build. Inexorable Tide. For 3 blue, blue. Enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. So, all those Atraxa decks, you're definitely going to run this card in there. Oh, yeah. Anytime you need to proliferate, I don't know, say infect counters or +1/+1 counters or counters. Yeah. Oh, man. This card is awesome in those kinds of builds. And definite auto-include for those kinds of decks. Training Grounds. For 1, activated abilities of creatures you control cost up to 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana an ability costs to activate to less than 1 mana. So if you are running a lot of stuff that has activation stuff going on, definitely put this in because it only costs you 1 and it makes everything so much cheaper to do. Definitely include that in those kinds of decks. Back to the basics. For 3, non-basic lands don't untap during their controller's untap steps. So if you're running mono blue, put this ridiculous card in there and then run almost all basic lands except for a few utility lands, and then you will be completely justified in running back to the basics. Holy moly, that's a ridiculous card. Now, this next one is more a card for CEDH competitive play, and that is Mental Misstep. It costs you nothing because it's Phyrexian. It costs you 2 life to play it, or 1 blue. And it's counter target spell with converted mana cost 1. So, you're not going to want to run this in just a casual or even competitively casual Commander deck, but this is something you'd certainly want to include in a CEDH build, a competitive play. Just wanted to mention it because it's out there, it exists, and it is a staple in competitive EDH. On with the honorable mentions is Copy Artifact. For 2 enchantment. Select any artifact in play. This enchantment acts as a duplicate of that artifact. It is affected by cards that affect either enchantments or artifacts. The copy remains even if the original artifact is destroyed. Enchantments on the original artifact are not copied. You can tell this is super wordy because this is a pretty old card. It's basically just a super cool way to, duplicate mana rocks or artifacts that you want to have duplicate. It's very situational. Worth mentioning though because it only costs you 2. So let's say you have some kind of a mana rock out there. You could drop this thing, duplicate that, and now you got double mana rocks. Hey, that's pretty cool. Tezzeret Artifice Master for 5. Legendary Planeswalker Tezzeret. +1, it gets create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Its 0 is draw a card. If you control 3 or more artifacts, draw 2 cards instead. Oh, that's powerful. So if you're running artifact heavy decks, this is the way to go for sure. And its ultimate is you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, search your library for a permanent card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. If you ultimate this thing, you need to send me a little meme and say, haha, I did it with Artifice Master. And I'm going to be like, 2 thumbs up, man. 2 thumbs up. Academy Ruins. Definitely worth mentioning. It is for 2. You tap it, put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. Very specific, very niche. That's why it's in the honorable mentions. And a strange one, a very strange one that you have to read like 5 times and go search and figure out why would anybody care about this card. It's Minamo School at Water's Edge, legendary land. You can tap it, add blue to your mana pool, or you can play 1 blue, tap, untap, target legendary permanent. So if you're legendary heavy or you got legendary stuff going on, including legendary lands, this thing is great. And it's blue mana. And if you notice, it doesn't come in tapped. So, hey, groovy. Might want to consider it depending on what kind of a build you're doing. Treachery. It's a 5-drop enchant creature. When Treachery comes into play, untap to 5 up to 5 lands. That's cool. You control enchanted creature. So, that's jank. That's some hardcore evil stuff right there. Then we got Tinker. It's 3 as an addition cost to cast Tinker. Sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card and put that card onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. So this is just a way to go start fetching stuff in an artifact heavy build. And here is one of the best blue cards of all time. Yes, I said it, all time. Gilded Drake. It's 2 summon Drake 3/3 flyer. When Gilded Drake comes into play, exchange control of Gilded Drake for target creature one of your opponent's controls, or sacrifice Gilded Drake. So you give somebody a 3/3 flying dragon for their ridiculously hardcore creature that they have on the battlefield. And this is just bananas great. I put it into honors mention, even though it may actually be more of an auto include in blue builds. So I leave that up to you, whether you determine that's an auto include or not. And we are getting to the end, folks, of these honorable mentions. It's Time Spiral for 6. Remove Time Spiral from the game. Each player shuffles his or her graveyard and hand into his or her library, then draws 7 cards. You untap up to 6 lands. And then search for Azcanta for 2. It's a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard. Then if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform search for Azcanta. So this is definitely something you're going to run if you're trying to get stuff into your graveyard. And then on top of that, once you flip it, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So you can start sifting through your deck, which is never a bad thing. Dig Through Time. This is super jank card time. It is 6 blue with Delve. And it's each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1. And it's look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So yes, you can remove a bunch of cards out of your graveyard and spend only 2 to do that. And last but not least in these honorable mentions is Thassa, God of the Sea. For 3 blue, legendary enchantment creature god. It's a 5/5 indestructible. And its devotion has to be 5 to become a creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. And for 2, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Definitely situational, depending on what kind of build you got. And it's a fun card to play. So, Thanks for coming this far with me on this little essential blue card journey for Commander EDH. Again, check out the link below to check out the other colors of the color wheel. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a friend of the gathering, and we'll hopefully see you at the next episode.